As Operation Epic Fury illuminates the Iranian horizon, a silent $200 billion heist is hollowing out the American domestic landscape. This isn't a digital breach, but a calculated policy shift, vacuuming capital from local clinics and classrooms toward global frontlines. While Washington justifies a $1 billion reduction in annual food assistance as a fiscal necessity, it simultaneously authorizes an expenditure 200 times that amount for a conflict less than 30 days old. This pivot reveals a staggering $6.6 billion daily military burn rate, capital that could theoretically renovate every failing bridge in the 50 states in under a month. The federal government's claim of domestic insolvency stands in stark contrast to this limitless war chest. This price tag of a global pivot exposes a grim 2026 reality. The economic security of American neighborhoods is being systematically dismantled to fund an overseas campaign, trading long-term domestic health for short-term geopolitical dominance. The clinic versus the carrier. The 2026 healthcare hijack represents one of the most significant domestic resource diversions in modern history, as $200 billion in potential medical funding vanishes into the logistics of the Middle East conflict. To understand the scale of this theft, one must look at the clinic versus the carrier. This capital, currently powering maritime blockades and carrier strike groups, is the exact amount required to provide a full year of comprehensive health care for 22 million Americans. This isn't just a statistical abstraction. It is equivalent to providing free, high-quality medical coverage for every single resident of Florida or New York for an entire year. Instead of funding preventative screenings, maternal care, or life-saving insulin, the 2026 budget has prioritized the deployment of high-cost interceptor missiles. While community clinics in rural America are closing due to a perceived lack of funding, the federal government is authorizing the equivalent of their entire annual budgets in a single hour of combat operations. This redirection creates profound domestic insecurity, as the health of the American workforce is traded for geopolitical dominance. By choosing hardware over health, the administration has effectively orphaned 22 million citizens from a medical safety net they helped build, proving that in 2026, the most expensive casualty of war is the American patient who can no longer afford to be sick. Feeding 30 million for 1,000 days. Simultaneously, the stolen grocery budget exposes a haunting logic in the 2026 fiscal strategy, the trade-off of feeding 30 million for 1,000 days. While the nation watches as 6 million of its most vulnerable neighbors are purged from the SNAP program, a move intended to save $1 billion a year, the underlying data reveals a staggering depth of this resource desertion. The same $200 billion currently fueling Operation Epic Fury could have provided 3 full years of food assistance to 30 million people. The math of 2026 is brutal. The government is incinerating enough capital every single day to fund a month of food security for the entire state of Texas. This is not a crisis of scarcity, but a crisis of allocation. While parents in the 50 states navigate the great hunger cliff and record-high grocery inflation, the resources that could have stabilized the American diet until 2029 are being converted into munitions. This resource desertion means that while the conflict 7,000 miles away continues to burn, the kitchen tables at home are being emptied by a budget that treats human nutrition as an optional luxury. Every missile launch represents thousands of school lunches that will never be served and thousands of pantries that will remain bare. In 2026, the stolen grocery budget confirms that the nation is quite literally eating its own future, sacrificing the long-term health and stability of 30 million citizens for short-term projection of power on a distant front line. By choosing the hardware of war over the humanity of hunger, the 2026 budget has effectively traded 3 years of national stability for a daily burn rate that the American family can no longer afford to sustain. The $200 billion shelter gap. The 2026 Asphalt Transition has turned suburban parking lots and highway shoulders into final safety net for 17 million Americans, a staggering population that could have been fully housed if the $200 billion fueling the current Middle East conflict had remained within domestic borders. This $200 billion shelter gap is a direct result of a fiscal policy that systematically prioritizes military hardware over human habitation. In states like California and Texas, the rise of the working homeless, individuals with full-time employment who nonetheless reside in vehicles or tents, is a physical manifestation of this massive resource diversion. Instead of the 17 million housing vouchers that would have stabilized the domestic rental market and cleared the burgeoning encampments, the federal government has opted to fund a munitions stockpile that depreciates with every authorized launch. Each time a carrier group is repositioned or a precision strike is executed, the capital required for a family in Austin or Los Angeles to secure permanent housing effectively vanishes. This creates a zero-sum reality where security of global trade routes is purchased at the cost of local residential stability, forcing the American middle class to navigate an era where the hardware war is more protected than the front doors of its citizens. Robbing the future. The theft of domestic potential deepens when examining the classroom frontline, where the 2026 budget has effectively orphaned 15 million children from their educational future. The redirection of $200 billion has forced a brutal trade-off between universal pre-K and precision strikes, leaving an entire generation in the shadows while the skies over a distant war zone are illuminated by American technology. Data from the March 2026 budget cycle reveals that the same capital required to provide comprehensive childcare or preschool for 15 million students is instead being consumed by the $41 million hourly burn rate of Operation Epic Fury. In industrial heartlands like Ohio and Pennsylvania, the impact is felt not in headlines, but in the quiet closure of early childhood centers and the reduction of state-level educational subsidies. Every launch of a $2 million Tomahawk missile is a financial mirror of 20 low-income housing units or a dozen fully funded classrooms that will never exist. This is the robbery of the future, a systematic exchange of the next generation's development for the immediate destruction of a distant one. By prioritizing hardware over humanity, the 2026 administration has triggered an identity crisis that asks whether a nation can truly be secure when its children are sidelined by the very budget meant to protect them. As the national debt surges toward $37 trillion, the defense versus domestic irony becomes impossible to ignore. The federal government continues to authorize $1 billion a day for military engagement, while simultaneously removing the categorical eligibility that once protected 6 million citizens from the hunger cliff. This fiscal pivot proves that the 2026 heist is not a failure of resources, but a deliberate selection of priorities. For the 17 million Americans facing eviction and the 15 million children losing their educational foundation, the war isn't a foreign policy objective. It is an immediate domestic threat to their survival. The asphalt transition and the classroom crisis are two sides of the same coin, mended by a budget that values global dominance more than the stability of its own households. In the 50 states, the cost of the 2026 war is being measured in lost homes and empty desks, marking a historic era where the most expensive weapon in the American arsenal is the housing and education that are no longer being provided to its people. Education as a casualty of war. The educational landscape of 2026 has become a secondary battlefield where the Pell Grant erasure is effectively stalling the social mobility of 27 million Americans. While the federal treasury continues to fund the $41 million hourly expenditure of the conflict in the Middle East, the door to higher education has been slammed shut for an entire generation attempting to escape the 2026 recession through degree attainment. The logic of this heist is stark. The $200 billion currently diverted to the front lines represents the exact fiscal weight required to provide Pell Grants to 27 million students. Instead of investing in the intellectual capital of the 50 states, the federal budget has prioritized the kinetic capital of precision munitions. For students at state universities from Florida to Washington, this isn't just a policy shift. It is a direct theft of their career potential. By choosing to fund maritime blockades over tuition assistance, the administration has effectively traded the future engineers, doctors, and innovators of the American workforce for a short-term military advantage. This creates a haunting irony where the very nation the military is meant to protect is being hollowed out from within, as its brightest minds are priced out of classrooms that were once their only hope for economic survival. In 2026, the heist has taken the tuition money from every state university and sent it to the front lines, leaving millions of students with no path forward. This educational crisis is a central pillar of the broader new identity crisis that exposes a deep irony within the Make America Healthy Again, or MAHA, rhetoric of 2026. While political slogans promise a return to domestic vitality, agricultural purity, and physical wellness, the actual 2026 budget reveals a nation suffering from profound disconnect between its words and its wealth. The contrast is jarring. A government that champions MAHA principles yet authorizes $2 million Tomahawk missiles, while simultaneously debating the merits of a $2 school lunch. This security for whom? Debate reveals that the concept of national security has been narrowed to exclude the actual health and resilience of the citizenry. Security for whom? As the national debt surges toward $37 trillion, the heist continues to drain the resources necessary for the very health and nutrition initiatives the administration claims to support. True security is not found in the range of a missile, but in the health of a population that is fed, educated, and housed. The 2026 budget represents a fundamental betrayal of this truth, as it sacrifices the long-term domestic health of the American people for a daily burn rate that provides no tangible benefit to the kitchen tables of the 50 states. The cumulative impact of the $200 billion heist is a domestic landscape where every state university and every community clinic has become a casualty of war. By documenting these trade-offs, from the Erasure Pell Grants to the neglect of children's nutrition, a forensic audit of the 2026 fiscal year confirms that the forever war is being paid for with the very fabric of American society. At our 50 states, the mission remains to track these receipts and expose the true cost of global dominance. As the conflict 7,000 miles away continues to consume the nation's potential, the first step to reclaiming that future is understanding exactly what has been taken. The 2026 war is being fought in our bank accounts and our classrooms, and until the priorities of Washington reflect the needs of its neighborhoods, the heist will continue to leave the American people behind. Stay informed, stay vocal, and look out for one another as we navigate this era of historic trade-offs together. What your state could have bought. The localized impact of the 2026 heist becomes most apparent when visualizing the $200 billion through a state-by-state lens, revealing a profound geography of lost opportunity. If this capital had remained within domestic borders, its application would have radically transformed the infrastructure and security of the 50 states. For instance, in Mississippi, this sum would have been sufficient to repair every structurally deficient bridge and provide tenfold nutrition security for every child in the state. In Nevada, where the global conflict has stifled international travel, that same $200 billion could have fully replaced every lost tourism dollar, stabilizing the local economy overnight. In Texas, this funding could have modernized the entire state's energy grid multiple times over, ending the threat of winter blackouts forever. Meanwhile, in Michigan, it could have replaced every lead pipe in the state 10 times, securing clean water for generations. This data proves that the 2026 war isn't just a foreign policy event. It is a direct drain on the essential services and physical safety of every American zip code. This brings a national conversation to the final audit, a necessary demand for transparency in what is arguably the largest wealth transfer in American history. The $200 billion diverted to frontlines represents a systemic hollowing out of domestic safety nets and future potential. The R50 states community is now asking, which of these 5 primary losses hits the average family the hardest? Is it the evaporated health care, the gutted food aid, or the stolen educational potential of the next generation? By documenting these localized impacts in the comments, viewers are contributing to a citizen-led record of the true cost of global dominance. The 2026 conflict is fundamentally a heist of domestic potential, where the hardware war has been prioritized over the health of neighborhoods. At our 50 states, the receipts are tracked so the public doesn't have to. Subscribing ensures a connection to the data that Washington prefers to ignore. Stay informed, stay vocal, and above all, look out for one another as a nation navigates this era of historic trade-offs together.